And first on the podcast today is going to be The Heroic Villain, book number 2, written by Charles Dean. It is 373 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. After conquering all of Hesse, creating a devilish new dungeon, and establishing himself as the villain that everyone loves to hate, Lucas decides to continue his quest to create new content by taking over as a dungeon master on the mainland. Unlike the dominant force on the island he left behind, however, the once mighty Imperium only controls a single capital city in a rapidly shrinking territory, leaving a group of scheming nobles to bicker among themselves and fight over scraps of land. Seen as an upstart and rabble-rouser, Lucas is instantly shunned and must struggle to find somewhere to begin building his new base. Now, after declaring himself the enemy of every man in the city, and with every player in the region hunting his head to claim the bounty placed there, Lucas has to decide which allies he can trust as he fights to stay alive long enough to establish a new lair and gain a foothold in a hostile land. Introducing new monsters, a curious group of new members, and flashy new spells, this game-lit RPG adventure follows Lucas as he writes his own story as the greatest villain the game world has ever known. Okay, full disclosure, I received an advanced copy of this novel. I actually did some minor beta reading for the author. I did purchase a copy when it became available, so there you go. This story, first I'll say, but I really liked book number 1 of the series. Book number 1 had some very interesting emotional tones that really resonated with him personally, and that character arc for the main character, that emotional journey in book 1, was definitely like a big highlight for me. In book number 2, a lot of the emotionalism is not existing. I mean, it's still there, but it's not the same one. And I absolutely understand why it has to be the case, because that arc was kind of resolved in book number 1, right? So book number 2 has to be something different. In book number 2, what it does to kind of replace that is it ups the villain stuff in the series. And I think that it's a good story. It's very enjoyable, but it's enjoyable in a slightly different way for me than book 1. Book 1, I think one of the things I thought was kind of lacking, according to the title, was he's a heroic villain. And in book 1, that arc is just kind of starting, where he's a lot more hero than villain. And that is definitely addressed in book number 2. Like, there's definitely a big step towards the villainous side of that particular title. And I think a lot of readers are really going to enjoy that, if you like that kind of story, of course. The main character really leads into bold villainous actions that I think actually readers are going to empathize, even if you don't like hardcore villainy, like evil kind of stuff. That's not what this is. This more along like the main character is being bold and kind of doing the things a lot of us would love to do in real life, except that we have, social constructs and social rules and laws that would stop you from doing these things, even if you have the impulse to do so. Like calling out people for being fake. And being fake in good ways, or battling smug jerk players, or foiling the plans of not good NPCs, like bad people, with even more devious plans of your own. The main character really does, he gets into that role of being a villain. I actually really enjoyed the way the story kind of unfolds in that respect. Like I said, this is kind of the big thing for the story that I think it's good about it. The main character just doesn't suddenly become evil. He rationalizes it. He thinks like, oh, these are my impulses in the first place, and I can kind of, let myself do them because I'm a villain in this story. I've intentionally created this mythos around myself and being the villain, so I should probably, lean into it because I'm trying to save this game. I'm trying to get players to come back and be interested in this storyline that I'm kind of creating on my own. And I really enjoyed that kind of like reasoning to do the things. It makes perfect sense in the story, but I like the internal rationalization of it because it makes everything else that comes after it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, it just kind of reveled in kind of an odd way, like, oh, that is a terrible thing to do, man, but I get why you did it, and it makes perfect sense in the story. And that's kind of the thing I liked about the story the most. I like it in a different way than I did in book 1. Book 1, again, had some very interesting concept, and again, some things that resonated with me on a very emotional level, but this one has good things as well, just different good things. some of the things that are going to be expanding in the particular novel or the series, the main character also kind of puts together this harem thing going on, and it's not the kind of harem where it's like just hardcore sex or anything like that. It's more along the lines of the Tenchi Muyo kind of harem, where it's like a bunch of like very attentive ladies, and again, it's tying very specifically into that villain persona of him stealing women from apparently like the good guys, who in the story, like the good guys are just players who fulfill the quest line, and suddenly they have this NPC companion who's in love with them, and the main character definitely flips the script on them, in like stealing them away. Like, and it's a very funny way to do it, and it's very interesting, and I really enjoyed the way that it happened in the story. There is no graphic sex in the story. There are, at the end of the story, some inferences of sex, and I'm okay with that. It's a very skippable end kind of epilogue thing going on there. But it also definitely plays into the kind of character arc of the story, getting over his emotional losses. And it makes perfect sense in that respect. So I'm okay with it. Even if it's not like my favorite scene, if I'm being honest. But it makes sense to me. And I'm definitely think it's going to, like, that whole concept is going to appeal to like some readers who enjoy the kind of stuff. So it all makes perfect sense. So it's a good story for me. The custom game mechanics in this series are still on par. You get some more explanations, but you're not getting as many like crunchiness numbers as in book one necessarily, because all the game mechanics have already been established. There is more dungeon building in the story, just like there was in book one. There's monster taming in book two, which I appreciated. And I actually really enjoy the way that the author has his game mechanics established, and he doesn't make them wishy-washy. He doesn't bend the rules for the game. Instead, he creates an intelligent character who's doing smart, intelligent things with the game mechanics to kind of either exploit them or to maximize them, so that his group can survive against superior, higher level forces. And that makes perfect sense to me. And that's what makes this kind of story, because it's smart and intelligent, and it uses the game mechanics to establish, instead of like breaking them just so the main character can win or something. Instead, the author works within the rules that he's established, and he makes an intelligent character instead. So I always appreciate that. Overall, this is a good story, and again, it leads more heavily towards the villain part of the heroic villain series title, and I think that's going to be the big selling point. I think that's the thing people enjoy the most. So for me, I had a good time with it. Gets a score 7.6 out of 10. That is the Heroic Villain, book number 2, with the score 7.6 out of 10.